I never thought my wrinkled old hands would tremble like this again. Not at my age. At 82, I thought life had already shown me every possible storm. But nothing, could have prepared me for the night I saw my foster father, George, leaning toward me, his breath heavy, his eyes dark, his hands reaching out with a hunger that made my skin crawl. I froze, heart pounding like a trapped bird. He was supposed to be the man who raised me, the man my mother trusted, the man who promised to protect us both when times were hard. But in that dimly lit living room, with the shadows from the lamps stretching across the walls, he wasn't my father figure anymore. He was a predator. "Don't be scared," he whispered, his voice low and sticky, like something rotting. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked up. My mother was upstairs, sickly and weak, depending on George for everything. I thought of her, how helpless she had become, and my chest burned with anger and shame all at once. And then it hit me. If I didn't stop him, he would keep going. He would push further. And one day, it might not stop at just steps or whispers. But you need to understand, what happened next, the choice I made, would change everything. It would lead me down a path that ended with George's death. Yes, my foster father died. And it all started that night. I still hear the echo of his final breath sometimes. But before I tell you how it happened, you need to know who I am. My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm a blonde grandma, born in the fall of 1943 in a small town just outside Des Moines, Iowa. Back then, the world was different. Families were tighter. People trusted neighbors. And my mother, well, she was the sweetest woman you could ever meet. She worked 2 jobs to keep food on our table after my real father passed away in a farm accident when I was just a baby. That's when George entered our lives. He wasn't blood, but he became my mother's lifeline. He worked at the post office, always smiling, always polite, always helping. At least, that's what the world saw. But me? I started noticing cracks in his mask when I was barely a teenager. His eyes lingered too long. His compliments weren't fatherly. They carried a weight, a darkness I couldn't name back then. Still, what choice did we have? My mother depended on him. I depended on him. And that dependency gave him power. Looking back now, I wonder if I should have run sooner. If I should have screamed louder. If I should have told someone else instead of keeping it locked up in my heart like a dirty little secret. But I was scared. I was young. And he knew it. I tried to tell my mother once. I remember it like yesterday. I was 17, sitting at our small kitchen table with chipped white paint. My hands shook as I said, "Mom, George makes me uncomfortable. He says things." Her face went pale. She looked at me with those tired blue eyes, the ones that had carried me through everything. But then she shook her head, whispering, "Don't say that, Evelyn. He's helping us. We can't afford to lose him." And just like that, my words were swept under the rug. My truth was buried. Years passed. I grew older, but the feeling never left. Even when I married and left the house for a while, it lingered. Life had its way of pulling me back to the same cursed home when my mother fell ill and couldn't manage on her own. And George? He was still there, smiling, waiting. That's how it built up to that night. The night he made his move. The night I realized my mother's silence had trapped us both. I knew I had 2 choices, surrender to his sick desires, or fight back in a way that no one could ever ignore. But the path I chose, it ended with him in a coffin. And here's the part you'll never believe. It wasn't the police who stopped him. It wasn't my mother. It was me. I took action. A single choice, a single moment, and the man who once controlled every breath in our house was gone. But I can't tell you just yet how. Not yet. Because before the world witnessed his death, before my hands carried that burden, there was a chain of moments that pulled me closer and closer to the edge. Moments filled with fear. Moments filled with shame. Moments filled with secrets that nearly destroyed me. And as I sit here now, in this quiet nursing home in Iowa, rocking in this creaky old chair, I can't help but wonder, if I had done something different back then, would my mother still be alive today? Would George still be alive? Would I still be carrying this guilt that weighs me down even as my body grows frilier by the day? But I'll tell you one thing. That night when George leaned close, when his breath touched my cheek and his hand brushed my shoulder, I made a promise to myself. He would never hurt me again, even if it meant ending him. And that promise, well, it's the reason you're hearing this story now. Because the very next day, I began to plan. To plan something that would make sure George never touched me again. Something that would lead me down a road of no return. Something that would end with death. His death. I leaned back in my chair that night, shaking but determined. My eyes landed on the drawer where my mother kept all the old medicine bottles. My fingers twitched as I whispered to myself, "If no one will stop him, I will." I closed the drawer with the medicine bottles and sat very still, listening to the old clock tick on the wall like a slow drum. I wasn't going to do something foolish or evil. I wasn't going to become like him. But I also wasn't going to let George keep walking toward me like a wolf in my living room. Not anymore. I needed a plan that would stop him for good and keep my mother safe, too. The hard part was that my mother still trusted him with her whole tired heart. That trust was my prison and his shield. My name is Evelyn Carter, 82, blue-eyed, white-haired. I still say blonde when I look in the mirror under a warm lamp, born and raised in Iowa. I like my mashed potatoes smooth, my coffee black, and my windows open when it rains. I am not brave by nature. I am careful. I fold my sweaters. I label the freezer meals. I keep a neat notebook by the phone with large letters so I can read without my glasses. But careful can turn into steel when someone you love is in danger. That night, careful became steel. Before the storm inside my house grew louder, there was a quieter season that led up to it. After my husband, Frank, passed, I moved back into my childhood home to help my mother. Her knees were failing, and her lungs worked like old accordions. George was already there, carrying groceries, paying the utility bills, cracking the same old jokes that used to make my Sunday school friends laugh. To everyone else, he was a helper. To me, he was a door I never wanted to walk through again. You would have thought I'd tell the ladies at church or the pharmacist who knows everyone's business in town. But shame is a tight scarf around the throat. I said nothing, smiled politely, and made sure I was never alone in a room with George, if I could help it. When he walked in, I walked out. When he stood in the kitchen doorway, I pretended I needed something in the yard. I kept myself moving, like a rabbit that refuses to freeze where the hawk can see it. But the day my mother got pneumonia, everything changed. We needed more help. George stepped closer into our daily life. He took over the pill organizer, the rides to appointments, the checkbook. "Let me handle it, Evelyn," he'd say, in that sweet, syrupy voice I've hated since I was a girl. "You rest. You're grieving your Frank." And my mother would pat his hand and say, "Isn't he wonderful?" That wonderful almost crushed me. I tried to raise it again, gentle, careful, kind. "Mom," I said one afternoon while folding towels by her bed, "sometimes George says things that make me uncomfortable." She blinked like I'd spoken another language. "He's our family," she whispered. "Don't make trouble. Trouble breaks homes." I remember staring at the towels in my hands, white and soft, thinking how clean things can look while a stain is still wet inside. So, I made a plan that did not depend on my mother believing me. I took a pen and wrote 3 lines in my big letter notebook. Tell a trusted person outside this house. Create proof. Control the doors and time. I called my old neighbor, Ruth, widowed, stubborn, brave. She taught first grade for 40 years and has eyes that can spot a lie the way hawks spot mice. I didn't tell her everything. No details I wouldn't want to say out loud. I just said, "If I ever call and say bring your apple pie, you come right away and don't hang up, okay?" She said, "Apple pie, got it," and didn't ask why. Good friends don't pick at your wounds. They hold the bandage when you need it. For proof, I found a little voice recorder in Frank's old tackle box. He used it to remember fishing spots and doctor's instructions. I tested it under the couch cushion. Worked like a charm. I slipped it into the ceramic bowl on the end table, the one shaped like a duck my mother bought at a county fair before I had teeth. I wasn't trying to spy for fun. I was building a fence of truth for the day someone would say, "Are you sure?" I was very sure. I just needed the world to hear why. For doors and time, I changed the habits in our home. I started locking the bathroom door when I showered. I kept my bedroom door closed, and a wooden chair leaned under the knob at night like a wedge. I set my phone to call Ruth with 2 taps. I placed a small bell against the back door so it would tinkle if opened. Little things. Quiet things. But quiet things can shout when danger steps wrong. George noticed. He always noticed. Predators don't just watch bodies. They watch patterns. "Why's your door locked?" he asked one evening, too casual. "Draft," I said. Old bones hate drafts. He smiled with all his teeth, but his eyes stayed cold. "You know I'm just here to help." I nodded and smiled back, the way you nod at a rattlesnake you plan to walk around without getting bit. Then came the first high. It was a Thursday, the kind of Iowa winter day that makes the sky look like a pale plate. I made soup. My mother napped. George came home early from the post office. Though I know they don't keep him that late anymore, he still pretends he's the same working man everyone respects. He stood too close while I ladled the soup, his breath warm on my neck. "You smell nice," he said. I kept my hand steady and said, "It's chicken." He put his hand on my shoulder, slow and heavy. The recorder in the duck bowl was running. My heart ran with it. I stepped forward just enough that his hand slid off and hit the counter. "Hot soup," I said, because simple words are a shield. He chuckled, but it sounded like a door creaking in an old barn. That night, when he took my mother her pills, I watched from the hallway and saw him pocket a small white tablet from the spare compartment. He flipped it into his pocket like a coin. It was quick, so quick I almost thought I imagined it. But I have lived through many winters. My eyes still work when it matters. I wrote down the time and the date in my notebook. Proof. The next low came quiet and small, my mother's confusion. She asked strange questions at breakfast, like, "When are we visiting Aunt Millie?" Aunt Millie has been gone 20 years. I checked the pill organizer and found 2 of her memory pills still sitting where they should be. My stomach tightened. George was managing her medicine to help, and somehow she was taking less than prescribed. Less help, more control. I took the organizer back, kindly, publicly, like it was my idea for a new system. "It'll be fun to do this together again," I told my mother, smiling. George laughed like he didn't care. But I saw his jaw clench. That small victory warmed me more than my electric blanket ever has. Another high. The back door bell tinkled at 10:41 p.m., a time when no honest wind should be playing tricks. I was in bed, chair wedged under the knob, phone under my pillow. Footsteps in the kitchen. Soft. Testing. I didn't move. I let the chair under my door speak for me. It spoke in wood and pressure. A slow rattle at my knob. Then silence. The kind of silence that presses on your ears and asks, "Are you sure?" I was sure. I texted Ruth a single apple emoji and put the phone face down. The next morning, I decided to add one more line to my plan, call for help with names that carry weight. I set an appointment with Pastor Bill, gentle, gray-haired, with a voice like Sunday morning sunshine. I told him less than half, but enough. I feel unsafe with George. He says things. He gets too close. He is controlling the medicine and money. Pastor Bill's eyes changed from soft to steady. "You don't need to prove this to me to be believed, Evelyn," he said. "But if you have proof, bring it." I felt my heart loosen for the first time in years. He gave me a number for Adult Protective Services and said, "Just talk. See what they say." I did. The lady on the line sounded young but firm. She told me about safety plans, about documenting, about restraining orders if needed. She did not roll her eyes like the world used to. She believed old women could be in danger. Imagine that. I saved her name in my phone and taped it inside the pantry door, behind the cinnamon and the nutmeg like a secret compass only I knew how to read. Days turned into a careful dance. George grew bolder again. Predators don't like fences. He told my mother I was being touchy. He told the pharmacist he'd keep a better eye on the dosages, like I was the one who couldn't count. He told me in a low voice one afternoon, "Frank's gone. You don't have to be lonely." I felt the old scarf of shame tighten, but I did not go quiet. I am not lonely, I said, holding a stare. I am busy. Then I stepped past him like he was a piece of furniture I'd grown tired of. The duck bowl listened to every word. If you're wondering why I didn't call the police right then, remember, the world is kinder to the first story it hears. George was already telling his story. Helpful man, cranky widow, confused patient. I needed mine ready, lined up like choir voices, so when the song started the harmony would be undeniable. Then came the night everything tilted. Snow fell in big soft flakes that stuck to the windows like feathers. My mother wanted cocoa, and I made it the way she likes, with a pinch of salt so the sweet wakes up. She was drowsy and warm when George came in from the cold, hat in his hand, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Let me take that up to her," he said, reaching for the mug. I stepped back. "I've got it." Our fingers didn't touch the handle at the same time, but it felt like they did. Static. Something in the room cracked, and it wasn't ice. I carried the cocoa up myself and sat by my mother while she sipped. "You're a good girl," she said with a sleepy smile. My eyes stung. I tucked her blanket and went back downstairs to wash the pan. That's when I saw it, on the edge of the sink, half hidden, a small crushed pill, wet from a splash, melting into nothing. Not her pill. Not mine. The wrong kind of white. I didn't need a lab to tell me it didn't belong in cocoa. I heard George's steps in the hall behind me. Slow. Certain. He stopped in the kitchen doorway. "Long day?" he asked. My hands were steady now. "Steel." "Very long," I said. "And it's going to be longer for you." He smiled. "Now, Evelyn." The bell at the back door tinkled again. Not from a draft. From a hand. Ruth's voice carried through the porch, bright as a sheriff's star. "I brought apple pie," she called. Too cheerful, the code loud on purpose. George's smile froze. He didn't want witnesses. He never had. He moved first. 2 quick steps toward me like he meant to block the sink, to lean close, to turn words into pressure. My foot slipped on the wet spot where the cocoa had splashed. Instinct made me grab for the counter. George grabbed too. My arm, the counter, the world. The heavy iron skillet we dry on the stove edge tipped, slid, and fell. There are sounds you don't forget. Birth cries. Wedding laughter. The crack of thunder when you didn't see the lightning. And the sound a skull makes when it meets the sharp corner of a granite counter. The skillet hit the floor with a clang. George didn't make a sound at all. He folded like laundry and went down. I stood there with soap on my hands, breath locked in my chest, the bell at the back door tinkling again as Ruth opened it. She rounded the corner with a pie in her mittened hands and stopped, eyes wide, mouth a small O that let a winter gust into my warm kitchen. "Evelyn," she whispered. I looked at George on the floor, at the slow dark halo spreading under his head, at the recorder blinking red from the duck bowl, at the phone on the counter 2 taps from help. My heart said move. My knees said pray. My mind said, this is the moment everything changes. I reached for the phone to dial 911, but before my finger touched the screen, George's eyes snapped open and his hand shot up, clamping around my ankle with a grip so hard it sent lightning through my leg. Then the kitchen light flickered and went black. The kitchen plunged into darkness. I froze, the only sound the tick of the old clock on the wall and Ruth's sharp intake of breath. George's grip on my ankle was iron, hot, trembling, desperate. For a man whose head had just hit stone, he clung to me with a strength I hadn't felt in decades. His nails dug through my sock like claws. "Don't you dare," he hissed, his voice wet and broken. "Don't you dare ruin me." My knees buckled. For a heartbeat, I was 17 again, cornered in that same kitchen, his shadow long and heavy against the cupboards. But then the present slammed back, my 82-year-old body, my mother upstairs, Ruth right here, apple pie forgotten on the floor, and George's blood seeping across the linoleum. "Let me go, George," I said, low and steady. My voice surprised me. It didn't sound like fear. It sounded like resolve. He coughed, a gurgle that sprayed dark spots on my slipper. His fingers loosened for just a second. Ruth gasped and knelt beside me, her mittens still on one hand, the other clutching her rosary necklace. "Evelyn, he's bleeding bad," she whispered. "We need to call someone." "I tried," I said. My phone was only an inch away on the counter, its screen glowing faint in the blackout. My fingers twitched toward it, but George yanked again. I stumbled, my shins slamming into the cupboard. Pain shot up my leg, but I didn't cry out. "You tell anyone," George rasped, "and your mother, your poor mother, she'll be all alone. You can't take care of her without me." The words stung more than the grip. My whole life, that's what he'd built his power on, our dependence. But I wasn't a child anymore. I'd buried a husband. I'd raised children of my own. And now, I was staring at a man who was supposed to be my protector, lying in a puddle of his own lies. "Ruth," I said, the phone. She grabbed it, hands shaking, and pressed it into mine. But before I could dial, the lights flickered back on. And in that sudden wash of yellow, I saw his eyes. Wild, bloodshot, terrified not of dying, but of losing control. "Don't call them," he bellowed, the strength in his voice shocking both of us. He tried to sit up, his hand slipping in his own blood, body jerking like a puppet fighting its strings. Ruth stumbled backward, the pie pan clattering across the tiles. "Lord have mercy," she gasped. "He's possessed." I didn't see a demon. I saw a coward, cornered, exposed, finally weak. And I knew then, clear as the storm outside, that if I didn't end this tonight, it would never end. He'd twist the story. He'd tell the town I was senile, that I tripped him, that I'd lost my mind. My mother would believe him. The law might even believe him. Men like George always find a way to polish their lies. So I made the choice. Not out of rage, not out of revenge, out of survival. "George," I said, staring him dead in the eye, "this is the last night you ever hurt me." I lifted the skillet. My hands didn't shake. For once in my life, I wasn't afraid of his shadow. But before the iron met his skull again, Ruth screamed. Not because of me, because of the front door. It swung wide open, letting in a blast of snow and a figure standing in the frame. It was my mother, wrapped in her quilt, hair disheveled, eyes wide with confusion. She must have woken and followed the noise. "Evelyn," she croaked, voice fragile as paper. Her gaze dropped to the floor, where George lay in blood, me holding the skillet high. The room spun. My breath caught. For a second, I wished the lights had stayed off forever. "Mom," I whispered, lowering the skillet. "It's not what it looks like." But it was. It was exactly what it looked like. Her lips trembled. "What have you done?" Behind me, George chuckled, a horrible rattling sound that rose out of his broken body. "See," he croaked, pointing a bloody finger at me. "Even your own mother thinks you're the monster." My mother's quilt slipped off her frail shoulders as she staggered into the kitchen. The draft from the open door blew snowflakes across the linoleum, melting into George's spreading blood. Her blue eyes darted from me, skillet still clenched in my trembling hands, to George sprawled on the floor, then back again. "Evelyn," she whispered. Her voice cracked like dry wood. "What have you done to him?" "I was protecting myself," I said, my throat raw, my chest heaving. "You don't understand. He was trying to—" George groaned, his bloody hand clutching at the edge of the counter like a drowning man grasping driftwood. "She snapped, Marion," he rasped, turning to my mother with a pitiful look, eyes wet with fake tears. She attacked me. I was only trying to help." The words punched me harder than his grip ever had. He was already spinning the story. Even half dead, his tongue was sharper than knives. My mother gasped and knelt down beside him, her knees cracking against the floor. "George, oh Lord, George, what's happening?" She pressed her hands to his chest like she could will the blood back inside him. "I told you," he whispered weakly. "She's unstable. Ever since Frank passed." I tried to be patient, he coughed, sputtering red on the tiles, but still his eyes gleamed like a snake that had found its opening. "Mom." I dropped the skillet with a clang that rattled the dishes. "He's lying. You know what he's been doing. How he's been treating me." But her face stayed twisted with confusion and fear, her frail body trembling as she shielded him. She looked at me like I was the stranger. The air in the kitchen grew heavy, pressing on my chest. Ruth moved closer to me, whispering, "Evelyn, don't lose yourself. Remember what's real." But reality was a thin rope I was slipping from. George groaned again, louder this time, reaching toward my mother. "Marion, call an ambulance. Please. Before she finishes me off." The gall. The poison in his voice. He was already making me the villain. I could see the way my mother's eyes filled with doubt, the way her lips trembled like she was trying to decide who to believe. Ruth gripped my arm. "We have to call 911, she hissed. "Now. No matter what happens. Let the truth fight its way out." But truth doesn't always win. I knew that better than anyone. The town saw George as the helpful widower, the kind soul who carried groceries and shoveled porches. Me? I was the grieving, tired old woman who sometimes forgot her keys and mixed up dates. Who would they believe? I stared at the phone in my hand, thumb hovering over the numbers. I could call for help, but if George lived, he'd twist every word until I was painted as a monster in my own mother's eyes. Then George laughed, weak but cruel. "Go ahead, Evelyn. Call them. By the time they get here, she'll be telling them how crazy you are, how dangerous." My stomach dropped. He was right. My mother was already staring at me with fear she never had before. I looked at Ruth. Her jaw was tight, her eyes blazing. "If you don't decide right now," she whispered, "he'll win. Even if he dies, he'll win in her memory. What are you willing to carry, Evelyn? What truth will you let them hear?" The clock ticked. George wheezed. Snow drifted in through the open door. My mother's hands shook as she whispered prayers over him, her voice breaking on every word. And me? I stood there with the phone in one hand, the skillet at my feet, and the heaviest choice of my life pressing down on my shoulders. Do I call for help and risk losing everything, my mother's trust, my freedom, maybe even my life? Or do I end it here, while Ruth is the only witness, and silence him forever before his lies spread like wildfire? George's bloodied fingers scraped against the floor as he tried to pull himself upright. He looked at me with that same sick hunger I'd known my whole life and whispered, "You'll never escape me, Evelyn." And in that moment, I tightened my grip on the phone, but my other hand was already reaching for the skillet. The kitchen felt like a courtroom, and I was the one on trial. The flickering light overhead cast long shadows across George's face as he slumped against the counter. Blood streaked his temple, but his smirk stayed steady, curling at the edges of his mouth like smoke from a fire that refuses to die. My mother, frail and confused, clutched his arm as if he were the one in danger. "Evelyn," she cried, her thin voice quaking, "put that skillet down before you do something you can't take back." My chest heaved. My hand hovered between the skillet on the floor and the phone glowing in my palm. My life had shrunk to those two objects, one promising help, the other promising finality. George coughed, a thick sound, and spit red into his sleeve. "She's dangerous, Marion. She's lost her mind. You have to stop her before she kills us both." His words were trembling but deliberate. Even bleeding, even half-broken, his tongue still spun webs. I wanted to scream, to shake my mother until she remembered all the moments I tried to warn her, the way he cornered me as a girl, the way he whispered filth when no one else was near. But her eyes were clouded, loyal to the man who had saved her after my father died. Ruth stepped forward, her voice sharp like a knife. "Marion, open your eyes. He's been hurting your daughter for years. You know it deep down. You've just been too scared to say it out loud." My mother's lips trembled. She shook her head. No. George has been good to us. Haven't you, George?" His smile widened as he leaned into her touch. "Always, Marion. Always." The audacity of that lie sent a white-hot rage through my veins. My hand tightened on the skillet. My arm shook, not from age, but from the weight of choice. Ruth whispered at my side, her voice fierce but low. "This is your moment, Evelyn. Don't let him write the ending to your story. Decide." And so I did. I dropped the phone onto the counter with a loud clack. My other hand wrapped around the skillet's handle. George's smirk faltered, just for a moment. His eyes widened. He realized then, really realized, that I wasn't afraid anymore. He tried to pull my mother closer, using her as a shield. "She's lost it, Marion. She'll kill us both." But my mother's hands slipped against his bloody shirt. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker in her face. "Mom," I said, my voice raw and breaking, "you always told me to stand up for myself. You told me not to let men walk over me. Well, here I am, standing. For once in my life, I won't bow to him. Not tonight. Not ever again." George's face twisted. His mask cracked. He lunged, not at Ruth, not at my mother, at me. Instinct took over. My arm swung. The skillet connected with his shoulder first, the sound sharp and final, like a gunshot in a barn. He collapsed, sprawling across the floor, his hand reaching one last time, before going limp. The room went silent. The only sound was my mother's shallow breathing, and the clock ticking like a gavel. I stood frozen, the skillet still in my hand, staring at the man who had haunted my entire life. He wasn't moving. Not a twitch. Not a groan. "Lord have mercy," Ruth whispered, clutching her rosary so hard her knuckles went white. My mother gasped, stumbling backward, pressing her hand to her mouth. "Evelyn, what have you done?" I couldn't answer. My knees buckled, and I sank into a chair. The skillet slipped from my hand and clattered onto the floor beside George's body. My chest heaved as tears burned my eyes, but my hands were steady. For the first time in years, they weren't shaking. Ruth knelt beside me. "It's over now," she whispered. But as I stared at George's lifeless face, I wasn't sure it was over. Not really. Because sometimes the dead don't stay buried. Sometimes their lies live longer than their breath. And sure enough, my mother's frail voice broke the silence. "You murdered him. You murdered the only man who ever took care of us." Her words cut deeper than any blade. My mother stumbled toward the phone on the counter, her trembling fingers reaching for it. "I have to call the police," she whispered, "before they think I was part of this." And there I was, frozen again, staring at her hand inching toward the phone, realizing I might have to stop my own mother next. The old phone glowed in the dim kitchen light, a small beacon on the counter. My mother's trembling fingers stretched toward it, her quilt dragging across the blood-stained floor. Every second that passed felt like a hammer pounding into my chest. "Mom," I said, my voice cracking. "Please, don't do this. You don't understand what just happened." Her pale hands hovered over the phone, the way a bird hovers before it lands. Her eyes were locked on George's motionless body, her lips quivering. I have to," she whispered. "They'll come for me too if I don't. They'll think I let this happen." Ruth stepped between us, her sturdy frame a wall. "Marion, listen to yourself. You're about to hand your daughter over to a system that won't believe her. A system that always believed him." But my mother shook her head violently, her thin hair flying loose. "He was our provider, Ruth. He saved us after Evelyn's father died. He kept this roof over our heads. And now he's dead." Her knees buckled, and she sank into a chair, sobbing into her quilt. The sound tore at me, but not as much as her words. Even with George lying lifeless at her feet, she still clung to his memory like a lifeline. I felt Ruth's hand on my shoulder, firm, grounding. "Evelyn, we don't have time. If she calls the police, they'll twist everything. You know they will. We need to decide what to do now." My stomach churned. I looked down at George. His eyes were closed, his lips parted. For a moment I thought maybe, just maybe, it was over. But then his chest jerked. A weak gasp rattled out. He was still alive. I stumbled backward, the chair legs screeching against the tile. "He's not dead," I whispered. "He's not dead." My mother's head snapped up, hope flooding her eyes. "Then we can save him." She lurched forward, reaching for the phone again. Ruth grabbed my arm. "If he lives, Evelyn, he'll ruin you. He'll twist this whole thing. You think your mother doesn't believe you now? Wait until he's whispering in her ear from a hospital bed. Do you really want to face that? The truth of her words hit me like ice water. I had lived my whole life under his shadow. If he survived, there would be no escaping him. Not in the courts. Not in my home. Not even in my mother's heart. I can't, I whispered. I can't let him do this to me again. I reached for the skillet. My hand shook this time, not from fear, but from the unbearable weight of choice. Evelyn, no, my mother screamed. She lunged at me, her frail hands grabbing my wrist. Her strength was weak, but her desperation was strong. Don't become a murderer. Please. Not my little girl. Her words cut deep, deeper than George's cruelty ever had. For a moment I faltered. Was I really about to take a man's life with my own hands? George's chest heaved again, a wet groan escaping his throat. His eyes flickered open, glazed but hateful. And then, through broken teeth, he whispered, "You'll pay for this." That was it. The last straw. My heart hardened. I pulled free from my mother's grip. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing. Ruth's eyes locked on mine, fierce and steady. "Do it," she whispered. "End it, or he'll never stop." I lifted the skillet, but before I could bring it down, George's body convulsed. His back arched, his legs kicked against the floor, and a choking noise gurgled from his throat. Then, just as suddenly, he went limp. The kitchen fell silent. I lowered the skillet slowly, my arms trembling. "Is he?" Ruth knelt beside him, pressing 2 fingers to his neck. Her face was grim, pale in the yellow light. "He's gone, Evelyn. He did it to himself." The blood, the fall, his body gave up. I staggered back, my knees buckling. My mother wailed, clutching her chest. "No, no. You killed him. You killed him." But I hadn't. Not with the skillet. Not with my hands. George had taken himself out of this world, whether by accident, arrogance, or fate. Still, I knew the world wouldn't see it that way. The world would see me, old Evelyn Carter, standing over a dead man with blood on her slippers and a skillet in her hand. Ruth grabbed my arm, her grip iron. "We need to clean this up. Now. Before anyone comes. You have one chance to decide, Evelyn. Do you tell the truth and risk losing everything? Or do we rewrite this night before it writes you out of your own life?" The phone on the counter glowed brighter in the dark kitchen, waiting. My mother sobbed, whispering George's name over and over. The snow outside piled higher against the door. And inside, I stood in the middle of a choice that would define the rest of my life. I looked down at George's lifeless body, then at Ruth's steady hand gripping mine, and finally at my mother's tear-soaked face. My lips parted, and I whispered the words that would seal my fate. "Then we hide him. Then we hide him." The words slipped from my mouth like smoke, and as soon as they were spoken, I felt their weight. Ruth's grip tightened on my arm. She gave a firm nod, her face pale but resolute. My mother gasped from the floor, shaking her head furiously. "No, Evelyn. Don't you dare," she cried, clutching at her chest. "If you hide this, you'll be damned forever. You hear me? Forever." Her voice cracked, but it didn't move me. Not anymore. I had lived in damnation all my life, damned by silence, damned by fear, damned by the shadow of the man bleeding at my feet. Tonight was my chance to reclaim what was left of me, even if it meant carrying a sin on my back until my bones turned to dust. Ruth bent low, checked his neck once more, and whispered, "He's gone. It has to look like an accident. He slipped. He fell. You weren't even in the room. We can make this right." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. My eyes darted to my mother, who was still sobbing against the chair, rocking back and forth like a child. She would never agree. She would never forgive me. But forgiveness was no longer my goal. Survival was. "Help me," I whispered to Ruth. Together, we dragged George's body across the kitchen tiles. His boots squeaked against the floor, leaving faint streaks of blood in his wake. My stomach churned, ball rising in my throat, but I forced my body forward. For once, I was stronger than the fear. We hauled him toward the back porch. The snow outside was thick, untouched, a blank canvas waiting to cover our sin. Ruth glanced over her shoulder. "We'll take him to the shed," she said, her breath visible in the cold.
"For now.
Until we figure the rest out." The shed. That old wooden shack behind the garden, leaning sideways like a drunkard. My father had built it with his own hands decades ago. To think it would become George's resting place twisted my stomach, but it was better than the law's cold grip. We pushed open the porch door. A blast of icy air stung my cheeks. The world outside was silent except for the wind howling through the trees. It felt like the earth itself was holding its breath, watching us. Step by step, we dragged him through the snow. His weight was unbearable, his body stiffening in the winter cold. Each pull left a trail, a scar on the pristine white ground. My arms ached, my back screamed, but I kept going. Every mark we left would need to be hidden. Every detail had to be erased. Finally, we reached the shed. Ruth yanked the door open, the rusty hinges crying out into the night. Inside, it was dark and musty, filled with the smell of old hay and rusting tools. We shoved him inside, his body hitting the floor with a dull thud. I flinched at the sound. It felt like it echoed through the whole county. Ruth bent over, hands on her knees, panting. "We'll cover him with tarp and wood. No one will look here. Tomorrow, we'll figure out more." I stood frozen in the doorway, staring at him. The man who had stolen my childhood, my peace, my voice, now still, powerless, nothing more than a pile of flesh and bones. And yet, even in death, I could feel him pressing on my chest, whispering in my ear, "Evelyn." I whipped around. It wasn't him. It was my mother, standing in the snow, her quilt dragging behind her like a funeral shroud. Her face was pale, her eyes burning with something between horror and rage. "You've damned us all," she hissed. Her voice was louder now, stronger than I'd heard in years. "Do you hear me, Evelyn? You've brought death into this house, and it will eat you alive." Her words sent a chill down my spine. "Marion, enough." Ruth snapped. "Do you want your daughter thrown in prison for protecting herself? Do you want George painted as a saint while Evelyn rots behind bars?" But my mother didn't answer. She turned, trudging back toward the house, muttering under her breath. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough. "She's a murderer, my own daughter, murderer." Ruth touched my shoulder. "She won't keep quiet," she whispered. "She'll tell someone. We'll have to watch her, Evelyn. Carefully." The thought made my stomach twist, but I knew Ruth was right. My mother's grief would drive her straight into the arms of the police, or the neighbors, or anyone who would listen. And if that happened, it wouldn't just be George buried tonight. It would be me. We shoved the tarp over his body, stacked old wood on top, and shut the shed door tight. The padlock clicked into place, a sound that felt both final and fragile. We trudged back to the house, our boots heavy with snow. My mother was waiting inside, sitting stiffly at the kitchen table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her tears were gone now. Her face was stone. "I'll never forgive you," she said quietly. I didn't answer. Forgiveness was no longer the currency I was chasing. Survival was. But as I crawled into bed that night, my bones aching, I couldn't shake the image of George's body in that shed. The way his dead eyes had almost seemed alive. The way my mother's voice had sounded so certain, so condemning. And then, just as I was drifting into restless sleep, a sound pierced the quiet. Thump. From outside.
From the shed.
I sat bolt upright, my heart slamming against my ribs. Thump. Louder this time. I froze, breath caught in my throat. It was impossible. George was dead. Ruth had checked. I had seen it myself. But then another sound, a dragging noise, wood scraping against wood, and a voice.
Low.
Raspy. Familiar. "Evelyn." I clutched the quilt to my chest, staring at the window. The snow outside was untouched. But from the darkness near the shed, I could hear him calling my name. The voice slid through the walls of my bedroom like a cold draft. "Evelyn." I sat frozen, my quilt clutched tight to my chest. My old clock ticked steadily, each second stretching like an eternity. I knew what I had heard. I wasn't losing my mind. The sound had been real, low, raspy, and dripping with menace. But George was dead. Ruth had checked. His pulse was gone. His body had been dragged across the snow with our own hands, shoved beneath tarp and lumber, locked in the shed.
There was no way.
And yet, thump. Another sound. Heavy, deliberate. From the yard.
From the shed.
I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my knees shaking. The wooden floor was ice-cold beneath my feet. My heart banged in my chest like a drum. I thought about waking my mother, but what good would that do? She'd only scream. She'd only call me a murderer again. So I reached for the old flashlight I kept on my nightstand. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped it. Step by step, I crept down the hallway. The house was dark, save for the faint glow of the street lamp filtering through the curtains. I paused outside my mother's door. She was muttering in her sleep, her words soft but sharp. Murderer, my daughter's a murderer. Tears stung my eyes, but I kept moving. When I reached the back door, I hesitated. The bell I had rigged earlier hung from the knob. It wasn't moving. No sound. No draft. Just silence. I clicked on the flashlight. A thin beam cut through the glass, falling on the yard blanketed in snow. My breath caught. The shed door was ajar. Wide enough for me to see the tarp inside was no longer where we had left it. The wood we had stacked so carefully had been pushed aside, scattered across the floor. And then movement. A shifting shadow. Lord have mercy, I whispered. The flashlight flickered, dimming. The batteries were nearly dead. Panic surged through me. I opened the drawer by the back door and pulled out the revolver my father had left behind, rusty, heavy but loaded. I hadn't held it in years. My fingers curled around the grip like it was the hand of an old friend. I pushed the door open. The cold slapped me in the face, burning my lungs. My boots crunched in the snow as I stepped onto the porch. The night was too quiet. No wind, no owls, not even the hum of distant traffic. Just silence, and my own ragged breathing. I raised the flashlight, the beam shaking in my trembling hand. The shed door creaked wider. And then I saw him. George. Or, at least, what was left of him. His body was slumped against the doorway, his face pale and smeared with dried blood. His head lolled to one side, his eyes half open, glazed over. His lips were cracked, but they moved. Evelyn. I stumbled backward, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly across the snow. No, I gasped. You're dead. You're dead. He shifted, one hand dragging across the frame of the shed. His nails scraped the wood, the sound sharp and awful. My finger tightened on the trigger of the revolver. Behind me, the back door burst open. Evelyn. Ruth's voice cut through the night. She rushed toward me, her robe flapping in the wind. What are you doing out here? I pointed the flashlight at the shed. He's moving. He's alive. Ruth turned, her eyes narrowing. She squinted into the darkness. Then she stepped forward, closer to the shed. There's nothing there, Evelyn, she whispered. It's empty. What? My breath caught. I swung the flashlight back. The shed door was shut tight. The wood stacked neatly. The tarp exactly where we had left it. No George. No blood. No movement. I blinked hard, my chest heaving. No, I saw him. He was there. He said my name. Ruth's hand settled on my shoulder. Firm.
Steady.
Your mind is playing tricks, Evelyn. Tonight has been too much. Let's go inside. Before you freeze. I stared at the shed, my pulse racing. My hands shook so badly, I almost dropped the revolver. Had I imagined it? Was my mother right? Was I slipping into madness? We went back inside, locking the door behind us. Ruth guided me to a chair, her eyes sharp, calculating. Listen to me, she said, her voice low. You can't lose yourself now. George is gone.
You saw it.
I saw it. Don't let his shadow haunt you. I nodded slowly, though doubt gnawed at me. Upstairs, the floorboards creaked. My mother was awake. Her voice drifted down, faint but clear. "They'll find out, Evelyn. The truth always finds its way out." Her words sent a chill down my spine that no fire could ever warm. That night, as I finally lay back down, the revolver on the nightstand, I swore I heard it again. A whisper in the dark, right beside my ear. "You can hide me, Evelyn, but you can't bury me." Sleep did not come. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it. The rasp of his voice, the scrape of his nails, the thump of his body dragging across the shed floor. I would jolt awake, my chest heaving, the revolver heavy in my hand. The night was endless, and by morning, I looked like a ghost staring back at herself in the bathroom mirror. My mother's words haunted me, too. The truth always finds its way out. She hadn't spoken another word to me that night. When I passed her room in the early dawn, I saw her sitting on the edge of her bed, quilt wrapped tight around her, rocking slowly, whispering prayers. Not for me, for George. Ruth was already at the kitchen table when I came down. She hadn't slept either. Her coffee sat cold in front of her, untouched. "We can't keep him in that shed forever," she said, her voice low and firm. "The snow will melt. People will start asking questions. We need a plan." Her words twisted my stomach. A plan. Another one. I thought killing him, or watching him die, would be the end of it. But death doesn't end things. It begins something darker, something heavier. "I don't know if I can do this," I whispered, my hands shaking around my teacup. "You can," Ruth said sharply. "You don't have a choice, Evelyn. If you collapse now, everything falls apart. Do you want the whole town calling you a murderer? Do you want to spend your last years in prison while George rots in the ground as a saint?" I said nothing, because she was right. But my mother chose that moment to shuffle into the kitchen. She looked at me like she was staring at a stranger. "You can't erase what happened," she said. "And I won't lie for you. I'll tell the truth." The truth. Her truth. Which meant George's truth. Not mine. Ruth stood, her voice suddenly cold as steel. "Marion, if you breathe one word to anyone, you'll destroy your daughter's life. Do you really want that on your soul?" My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. She said nothing more, just turned and walked back upstairs, her quilt dragging behind her like a trail of smoke. Silence filled the kitchen. Ruth leaned in close. "She's the danger now, Evelyn. Not just George's memory. Your own mother." Her words struck me like a slap. My own mother, my last family, was turning into the one person who could damn me completely. That afternoon, Ruth and I trudged out to the shed. The air was crisp, the snow crunching under our boots. My stomach knotted tighter with every step. When Ruth opened the padlock and swung the door wide, I braced myself. I expected the tarp, the wood, the smell of blood. But what I didn't expect, what froze my breath in my lungs, was the emptiness. The tarp was there, yes, but it was crumpled in the corner. The wood had been pushed aside. And George's body, his body was gone. My knees buckled. "No, no, no, no," I cried, clutching the doorframe. "He was here. We locked him in." Ruth's face went pale. She darted inside, her eyes scanning every corner of the shed. "Evelyn, calm down. Bodies don't just disappear. Someone moved him."
Who?
My voice cracked. "Who would take him?" The wind howled through the trees, carrying the sound of something metallic clattering in the distance. We both froze, listening. It came from behind the shed. We rushed around, snow flying under our boots. There, half buried in the drift, lay George's boot. The same scuffed boot we had dragged across the kitchen tiles. And next to it, footprints, leading into the woods. My stomach turned to ice. "He's alive," I whispered. Ruth shook her head.
No.
"He couldn't be. Those prints, they're too steady. Too straight. Someone helped him. Or," she trailed off, her eyes darting toward me. "Or what?" I demanded. "Or you're not as crazy as they think you are. Maybe he wasn't dead after all." The trees loomed dark and silent ahead of us, the footprints vanishing into their shadows. My whole body trembled. Was George alive, crawling back to finish what he'd started? Or was someone else, someone I didn't even know, now carrying his body deeper into the woods? Behind us, the house creaked. I turned, my heart lurching. My mother stood in the upstairs window, staring down at us. Her face was blank, her eyes cold. She raised her hand, and for a moment I thought she was waving. But then I realized she was pointing straight at the woods. I followed her finger with my eyes, dread curling in my stomach. From deep in the trees, faint and broken, came that voice again. Evelyn. And this time Ruth heard it too. The woods stretched before me, dark and endless, the footprints cutting through the snow like an accusation. My breath came in quick, shallow gasps. Ruth gripped my arm, her nails digging into my sleeve, steadying me. You heard it too, I whispered, my voice trembling. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. I did, but it wasn't strong. More like an echo. Evelyn, whatever's out there, we need to be careful. The echo. That's exactly what it felt like. Not a living man's voice, but something heavier. Something lingering. We followed the prints, each step sinking deep into the snow. The woods swallowed us, branches creaking under the weight of ice. My flashlight flickered, its beam bouncing against the trunks. Every shadow looked like George, leaning, reaching, waiting. Ruth walked ahead, her boots crunching steadily. If he's alive, he's weak, she said. If someone took him, they're dragging a body. Either way, we'll find the truth tonight. But the truth is never simple. The truth is jagged. The prints led us deeper until they stopped abruptly in a small clearing. At the center was a half-frozen creek. Beside it, the tarp we had covered George with, soaked, crumpled, abandoned. But no George. My knees gave way. I fell into the snow, my hands burning from the cold. He's gone, I whispered. He's just gone. Ruth scanned the clearing, her eyes sharp.
No.
Look closer. I followed her gaze. Across the creek, half hidden in the brush, something glimmered. I stumbled forward, nearly slipping on the ice. When I pushed aside the branches, my breath caught. George's wedding band, still smeared with blood, and carved into the frozen mud beneath it, 3 letters, shaky but deliberate. E-V-E. My stomach dropped. He had written my name. With his last strength, he had marked me. Ruth's voice was steady, but her hand shook as she picked up the ring. This is bad. If anyone finds this, they'll think I killed him. I finished, my throat raw. We both jumped when a voice called from behind us. Evelyn. It wasn't George. It was my mother. She stood at the edge of the clearing, her quilt wrapped tight around her shoulders, her breath puffing white in the cold air. Her eyes were wild, her cheeks flushed. You can't hide it anymore, she shouted. I saw what you did. You murdered him, and now you're trying to bury it in these woods. No, I cried, stumbling toward her. Mom, listen to me.
I didn't plan this.
He came after me, but she cut me off, her voice shrill and piercing. You've shamed me, Evelyn. You've shamed this family. I'll go to the sheriff myself if I have to. My whole world collapsed in that moment. My mother, the woman I had fought to protect, the woman I had sacrificed everything for, was ready to condemn me. Not George.
Me.
Ruth stepped forward, her voice low and dangerous. Marion, think about what you're saying. If you turn her in, they'll bury her in prison. You'll lose her forever. I already lost her, my mother spat. Her eyes burned into mine, filled with betrayal. The daughter I raised is gone. All that's left is a killer. The word struck me harder than the skillet ever had.
Killer.
I staggered back, clutching my chest. The wind howled through the trees. And then, faint, broken, but undeniable, the voice returned. Evelyn. All 3 of us heard it this time. My mother's face drained of color. Ruth gripped my arm, her nails biting into my skin. The voice came from the creek. We turned as one. And there, half submerged in the icy water, was George's body. His eyes were open, staring straight at me, glassy and lifeless. His mouth hung slack, the sound nothing more than the wind squeezing through frozen reeds. But the mark he'd left behind, my name carved in mud, was enough. His last act in this world was to damn me. My mother collapsed to her knees, wailing. Ruth pulled me back, whispering fiercely, "We need to decide now, Evelyn. Do we report this and risk prison, or do we cover it once and for all?" The revolver was still heavy in my coat pocket. My mother's sobs echoed in the clearing. George's dead eyes stared up from the creek, and the snow fell harder, erasing the footprints one by one. I looked at Ruth. I looked at my mother. I looked at him. And then, through tears that blurred the world, I whispered, "This ends tonight." I raised the revolver, not at George's body, but at the two women beside me, because one of them was going to destroy me, and I had to choose which one.